I'm now joined by independent MP Andrew Wilkie. He chairs a parliamentary group of federal politicians who support the Bring Julian Assange Home campaign. Thank you so much for joining us. As we've just heard, the Prime Minister says that he won't engage in megaphone diplomacy on the matter. Is it the right approach?
Well, g'day, Danica. Look, I think the time's over now for whispers and secret handshakes. Julian Assange has been incarcerated for, near on a decade, both in the Ecuadorian embassy and must be about 3 years now in Belmarsh prison in London. I think a lot of people have given the new government time to resolve this, but there we were last Friday and the British Home Secretary actually signed off on the extradition of Julian Assange to the US. So now's the time for really assertive, strong action. And I know I speak for a lot of people when I say, Anthony Albanese, you've got a good relationship with Boris Johnson and Joe Biden. Please pick up the phone and demand that this madness ends. When you boil it all down, we've got a Walkley Award-winning Australian journalist and Australian citizen who in 2010 revealed hard evidence of US war crimes. Surely he suffered enough. Surely he can be released from Belmarsh. The extradition can be dropped and he can be allowed to return home if that's his wish.
I guess this saga has dragged on for years now. Would that sort of megaphone diplomacy directly appealing, would that not really hurt the relationships?
Oh, no, I think it's the other way around. I think if Anthony Albanese made an unambiguous and strong public comment in support of Julian Assange, I think that would be helpful at this point in time. I think it would reinforce whatever's going on behind the scenes. And I tell you what else it'd do. It'd pull into line those members of the Labor Party who don't support Julian Assange. There's a range of views, understandably, within all the political parties, probably on the crossbench, I suppose, about Julian Assange. And there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation. But I call out to all members of the Parliamentary Labor Party to remember what this is about. The extradition is simply about Wikileaks publishing information in 2010 which embarrassed the US government, particularly evidence like that grainy black and white image of a US attack helicopter gunning down Iraqi civilians and killing Reuters journalists. It's about that. It's about media freedom. It's about the Australian government coming to the aid of an Australian citizen overseas who's in strife. It's also about putting a limit on the US claim to global legal extraterritoriality. It's also about calling out the UK that they're about to implement an extradition or allow an extradition based on an extradition treaty that specifically excludes these alleged offences. So there are so many layers, there's so many reasons for everyone in Labor to now get behind their leader, Anthony Albanese, and for Anthony Albanese to call an end to this madness.
What would have to happen, though, in the event that Australia does directly contact the US about this matter? Would Australia have to give something to the US in return in order to try and get Julian Assange back to Australia?
No, look, this is about right and wrong. This isn't about doing deals. We've got this Australian journalist who did his job. Wikileaks, the publishing house, did its job. It's very, very telling that the pilots of that helicopter gunship, they haven't gone to jail. The editors of newspapers in Europe and US that also published this information, they haven't gone to jail. This seems to be all about an Australian journalist embarrassed the US government. The US government wants to get even, and London and Canberra are happy to go along for the ride. We don't need to do a deal. We need to stand for what's right, and we need to fight for an Australian journalist. We need to fight for media freedom.
The UK has decided to approve that extradition to the United States. Was there a breakdown in communication, do you think, between Australia and the UK to start with?
Well, we'll probably never know what's been done behind closed doors through diplomatic channels. But clearly, whatever went on, it wasn't enough. There was about 4 weeks between the election of the new Australian government and the British Home Secretary, Priti Patel, signing off on the extradition. That was 4 long weeks, which should have been enough time for this matter to have been resolved. It wasn't. That's why I'm calling, absolutely clearly for the government to now be more forward-leaning, more assertive, more public, and to bring some comfort, not just to Julian Assange, but to millions of Australians who think this has gone on long enough. It was a slow burner for a long time. A lot of Australians didn't know much about it, didn't care that much, didn't like Julian Assange for a number of reasons. But I think that the tide's well and truly changed. A great many members of the Australian public, most Australian journalists, I think by now, many of my parliamentary colleagues say this has gone on long enough. The man has suffered enough. He needs to be busted out of prison and allowed to rejoin his family, allowed to come home if that's his wishes.
It's interesting. Julian Assange's wife has said that there's already been a shift in tone when it comes to Anthony Albanese dealing with Julian Assange. Is that what you're gathering, what you're hearing? Do you believe that there has been a shift?
Yeah, look, to be fair to the new federal government, there has been a change in tone, a change in sentiment, and that's good, but it hasn't amounted to anything. We instead have, during these last 4 weeks or so, the British Home Secretary signed off on the extradition. Unless there's an appeal within the next couple of weeks, Julian will be on a plane to continental USA, I assume. Heaven if I don't send him somewhere else like Guantanamo Bay. He'll face a court in the US and face the very real prospect of 175 years in jail. Not for hacking, I would add. Some people say, oh, he's a hacker and he deserves to go to jail. It was actually the US soldier Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning, who actually provided the classified information, which was published not only by Wikileaks, but by European and US newspapers. Now, Bradley Manning has actually been pardoned. So, this beggars belief. The source of the leak has been pardoned by the US government. All other media outlets in the US and Europe have not been hauled before the courts for publishing the material, but just Julian Assange. Julian Assange, who, I make the point again, he's a journalist. I mean, although the extradition is not about broader matters, it is worth noting that not only did WikiLeaks greatly offend the US Republicans by publishing that 2010 material about war crimes, WikiLeaks also outraged the Democrats by much more recently, and not within the scope of the extradition, publishing those emails to do with Hillary Clinton. The fact that he has published material in the public interest, which has been greeted very, very badly by the Democrats and the Republicans, I think that's all the evidence you need that that WikiLeaks and Julian Assange is non-partisan. He's a journalist and WikiLeaks is a publisher.
Independent MP Andrew Wilkie, we do have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Danica.